Good morning. Look at this. I've got several people here, many people online. Thank you for joining me for day 2 of What's That Form? The Purchase Contract 2020. It's actually 2024. I did not update that. Purchase contract did not change, although other documents did. So we're going to see if we can get started here. This is day 2, and yes, it is April Fool's, but this is not a joke. I did have a slide I was going to add there, but I didn't. So you're all good. We'll keep going. No April Fools this morning. If you want copies of these slides, I did not forget about you guys last week. I just had not cleared out my slide deck because I had everything from last week and this week combined, and it wasn't completed. So if you want a copy of last week and this week's slide decks, please email me, melissa.schwartz@realty1group.com, and I will send you a copy of those slide decks. The videos should be up by the end of the week. We're going to do a little edit here, but just please send me an email. Those of you online as well, because I did not take registrations, please send me that email and I will get everybody copies of the slide decks. Okay. For those that are not aware, you can find the copies of the non-member MLS access forms at phoenixrealtors.com. They have a section that says non-MLS. I don't know if it's actually the jointly legal forms right now, but I think they've changed it to non-member, and you can find it that way. So go to phoenixrealtors.com. All right, so let me put in the answer to a question that we had last week. We asked whether or not, how soon a buyer needed to notify the seller of changes in the loan program, financing terms, or lender described in the pre-qualification form. Was one of our questions last week. So the answer to the question is immediately. All right. And we had a little conversation about that, but the challenge that we were discussing was if the changes impact the seller, but that wasn't what the question was. The question was, how soon do you need to notify? The notification needs to take place immediately. Do you need to get a prior written consent? That's a totally different question. But you do need to notify if there are changes in the loan program. So just wanted to clarify that so everybody has the correct answer to that. And let's get started. There's the buyer shall immediately notify. All right, let's get started with today. If you all remember, we stopped and we were just getting ready for the due diligence section of the contract. So we want to start with the inspection period. Now, if you guys were here last week, you will notice by the numbers at the beginning of the sections that this is a part of the AAR contract. So section 6 of the AAR contract is the due diligence section, and 6A is the inspection period. When I bring in the non-member contract, you will see that they have letters instead of numbers for their sections. So inspections and due diligence is section O, line 175. And you will notice that I tried to indent. For those of you watching the slides, the indentation is pretty good guess that it is the non-member contract. Not only that, if you'll notice, everything coming from the left-hand side of the screen coming across is the non-member contract. If it is from the AR purchase contract, it's either coming from the top, the right, or the bottom, but everything from the left is the non-member contract, just to have some continuity here. You will notice that they have very similar language. I'm not going to read line item by line item, so some of the things are not exact, but for starters, the buyer shall pay for any property inspection during the inspection period. Isn't that interesting? We don't actually have that in the AAR contract. That's fine. The due diligence shall consist of the buyer's review and approval of SPUDs. So there are some different things in this non-member one, but basically there is a time period, right, that the buyer has to do their inspections. And there is a date someplace else. We'll hopefully find that later, but there is a time period for that inspection period. Again, some very similar language. I recommend you read through both of these, but nothing incredibly vastly different on any of them. So you'll see as we move forward, because we're going to go through this. So now here's where you see on the non-member contract that buyer shall have the 10 days or 20 days or other, because vacant land, the due diligence is a 20-day period, okay? So the right to cancel, again, this is backing up here that they have the right to cancel during that inspection period. They said in buyer's sole and absolute discretion, given notice of cancellation of this contract at any time prior to the expiration of the inspection period, buyer gets their money back. Pretty clear cut, buyer has the right to cancel during that period, okay? All right. So this is from the AAR contract, square footage, right? When is square footage usually done? When do we see it in any of our reports? Appraisal. Is the appraisal during the inspection period? No, but the buyer has to determine that and investigate it during the inspection period if it is of material matter to the buyer. So the non-member contract says buyer shall investigate the following items if buyer deems it material: square footage, pool barrier laws, water availability. Isn't that a new one, right? Water availability and sewer connection. You will see that I've pulled this particular two lines a couple of different places, right? Because those two lines compare to the AAR contract in several different areas, because they've got 4 different issues there that are completely separated in the AAR contract. So wood destroying organisms, what do we often refer to them as? Termites. But what is another wood destroying organism? Does anybody know? Rot, right? So if something is rotting, that is also considered a wood destroying organism, right? So here it says, notice, this says termite pest, right? Buyer deems it material, buyer shall investigate current or past wood destroying organisms or insects at the property, okay? So do you all know it is pest inspections, are pest inspections operated, who controls that? Does anybody know? Pests, wood destroying organisms. Where does that report go? Inspection report? Uh-huh. Yeah, the ABWI. So it's an Arizona department that handles those reports. And by the way, you can look them up, because guess what? Anytime a pest inspection is done, it's filed with the state, right? So you can look up past pest inspections. They're there, they're available. All right, flood hazard, right? Lender may require flood hazard insurance, but this is to the buyer, right? It's the buyer needs to review this. The other one actually, so this was kind of weird. This was in the bottom of a long section of things, and it said, that you might have costs for flood insurance. So again, some of the things are not necessarily as detailed. But then there's this little catch-all. Buyer is advised to review the buyer advisory to assist in the due diligence period. All right, so let's see if I can get the poll to work here. Let me go up here and find the poll for our folks online. We still have a few more polls. This is poll number 4. Let's hope that this is correct. Okay, so I'll move this to the side. People online, you should be able to activate your poll. It says a non-realtor may provide a copy of the buyer advisory to the buyer. Number 2 is per the AAR on-site wastewater treatment facility addendum, the seller pays the septic inspection fee. Are folks online? Unmute if you're having trouble getting to that, but you should be able to activate your polls and answer those questions online. There should be a thing that says poll, and just click on it. Number 3 is on the AARPC, how many days before close of escrow must the buyer conduct their final walkthrough? Anybody online playing with these? I'll give you a little time here. Do you see anything, Kevin? Okay, there we go. People are starting to do it. No, we have people on there. Okay. So a non-realtor may provide a copy of the buyer advisory to the buyer. We'll just give you another like 15 seconds, folks online. There are 10 people online, so so far only half of you are participating. There we go. Got a few more. All right. We'll go ahead and start in this room. Does anybody, this is pretty split. Anybody in here want to make a guess?
I think but it's a public forum, you know. So it's like,
Who actually created the buyer advisory? Does anybody know? Is it AAR? Or was it a collaboration between AAR and the Department of Real Estate? And it is available on the Department of Real Estate's website so that non-realtors may provide that and are highly encouraged to provide that. Okay, so per the AAR on-site wastewater treatment facility addendum, the seller pays the septic inspection fee. True or false? Title, Roberta? And now actually I'm blanking. I had my answers. Hang on one second. I have my answers sitting in my office. Hold that thought. So this is asking on the on-site wastewater treatment facility addendum, the seller pays the septic inspection fee. The answer is actually true. On that form, it is actually that the seller pays it. On the AAR purchase contract, how many days before close of escrow must the buyer conduct their final walkthrough? Okay, we've got a couple of different options. The day before, 3 days before, 3 business days before, or there's no set number of days. Same day as what? The question is, how many days before close of escrow must the buyer conduct? The comment, the word that Melissa Gasper picked up on is the word must. Is there anything in our contract that says the buyer must do something on a specific day?
They don't even must do a final.
Okay, so interestingly, the answer is actually the one online that nobody got, which was there are no set number of days. Let me share those results. Sorry about that, guys, online. So there are no set number of days. And there also, how many walkthroughs may the buyer do?
Since I got a cure notice about it, they can do one.
They can do one walkthrough? Really? That's what the contract says?
Well, walkthrough, yes, but the seller has to make the property available to the buyer but not like a final walkthrough, that was one.
How many walkthroughs may a buyer conduct on the property?
Seller they can do it one every day if the seller, it's reasonable, it says reasonable.
There is no number, right? There is no set number of days. That is the number of days prior, but there is no set number of days, a number of walkthroughs. You may conduct more than one walkthrough. You may only do one final one, which is what Melissa's comment was. You're right. And when should you probably do that final walkthrough?
You do it 3 days before for the 7 trial.
So 3 days, the reason the 3 day, why is there 3 days prior? The receipts and the work from repairs must be done 3 days prior. But really, I mean, yes, you should do one at that point, but shouldn't you take a look at the property like the day it's gonna close to make sure it's really
Standing.
still standing in the same condition? So I've walked into a flood before. Yeah, that's not a fun one. All right, oops. Okay, so insurance, as you can tell, this is from the AAR contract. Insurance, if in homeowners insurance of material matter, buyer needs to apply. And please note it says obtain written confirmation. Please remind your buyers they should get a written quote from people, not that they talk to people over the phone and got all these lovely things, because you and I both know those aren't going to last by the time they get it written. Okay, so similarly, the non-member contract says within 5 days, there needs to be insurance loss history. This is where they pull up the clue report, and buyer shall provide notice of disapproval from that. There probably is there was another little section on insurance on that other thing. It's kind of tied into reviewing stuff. So I kind of pulled, I think, the wrong line there. But sewer and on-site wastewater treatment, this is what is on the AAR. Notice that there are buyer initials. I have no idea where I got little curly cues here. Where did those come from? Oh, that's very, that is very bizarre. I don't know where they came from. I guess so. I don't know why they're sitting there on every page though. So sewer and septic, if you will notice that we talked about who's going to pay the inspection fee. Look, this is negotiable, right? Buyer, seller, or they're each paying 50-50. So they do say that it must be serviced 6 months prior to closing, and that the buyer must file the transfer form. That is very similar from the on-site wastewater treatment form itself. But the buyer shall pay the transfer fees, right? So that's the same. You could check either one for the basic. Okay, sorry about that. I don't have the actual, we actually have another form, right? We have our own on-site wastewater. I did not pull either of those. They actually have another form too, so I'm not quite sure why all that is in there. I don't know how to get those curly cues out of there. We'll leave them alone. Okay, swimming pool barrier regulations. So on the AAR contract, it says the buyer agrees to investigate state, county, and municipal swimming pool barrier regulations. This is what the pool disclosure on the non-member says, right? Buyers shall investigate, again, barrier laws, right? Pool disclosure, buyer acknowledges review of the Arizona Department of Health Services private pool safety notice upon signing this contract, which is also up above. Now, buyer acknowledges that brokers are not qualified to deal with the due diligence. I'm going to come back to the pool barrier in just a second. And the non-member says something very similar. If you're recommending, if the broker is recommending anybody, buyer needs to do their own due diligence, right? Conduct their own due diligence. Now, pool safety. I don't know if you guys can see that because it says AZ. I can't even see that. Is that what it says? DHS? No, it's not. Yeah.
DGS.gov.
Thank you. .gov. So what I want to share with you is for years, I used to print out this pool safety document and have my buyers sign it. I had a long conversation with our designated broker, Ron, who said, please don't do that. And the reason behind that is, how many of you have ever talked to your buyers about pool safety after you've given this to them? Did they look into it any further? No, because you just gave them something that they think covers it all, right? What does this paragraph say? Would somebody like to read that? State requirements in blah, blah, blah may be superseded by local requirements that are equal to or more restrictive than the state requirements? Have any of you ever looked up your city pool barrier requirements? Jason has.
I only know because we.
And we got into detail on this because you have a client with children under the age of 6. So the challenge is when we hand them that Arizona Department disclaimer, right? It's not a disclaimer, it's a disclosure, right? But it could just as well be a disclaimer because they're not going any further. They're not looking at anything else. How many of you have looked at the buyer advisory and the section on the pool barriers, right? It does show you what the Arizona state says, but it then says, here are the subdivisions, and guess what? Every single city not only has a phone number, but the city, if you notice, the city is underlined, that's a hyperlink that takes you directly to the pool barrier requirements of that city. Ron would prefer that you point your client to the buyer advisory and specifically tell your clients, go look at your city's regulations. Because I don't know if some of you seen this, but some cities have 4 foot, 5 foot, 6 foot fence requirements, right? Cities have different requirements than what the state has. And guess which one superseded? The city. So please stop giving the pool safety notice. Give them the buyer advisory, which has the pool safety notice in it, right? It's there. But instruct them to go look at their city regulations because ultimately that's the requirement. And by the way, when does the buyer have to have the home pool safe with children under the age of 6?
It's like you've been.
How long they have?
Yeah. How long after close do they have to have it pool safe?
What upon? Like,
Before occupancy.
Yeah.
Before occupancy. Before occupancy, not before closing, but before occupancy. So guess what? If they're moving in on day 2 after closing and they have children under the age of 6, that's not legal, not advisable, especially with everything being moved around. How easy is it to lose a small child? Well, you're unloading stuff with nobody knowing where things are. That pool has to be secured and locked.
is it governed by anyone?
Yeah, it is. It is. If the child dies in there, the parents will be liable.
The child died, but there's no inspector coming out.
No, no inspector coming out. And I actually lived in a neighborhood, it was a couple of blocks from a child just not very far from here that died in a pool. And that is such a tragedy, folks. So please, if you've got somebody with children under the age of 6, make sure they are aware of those things. All right, yep, Yep. to the buyer advisory, yep. Mhm. And that's a hyperlink. They may not realize those are hyperlinks, right? Because it just had the city and it's underlined. But if you're scrolling through that, and by the way, how many of you send the link to the buyer advisory?
It's
Right.
like in my link tree and everything.
Right. So does everybody know you can get a copy of that? Obviously from the Department of Real Estate, but if you're a realtor, you can get it from AAR online/buyer advisory. There's a Spanish version of it as well as an English version. Oh, scared me, the printer started. So you can get either one, but when you send the link, and I always send the link on my opening email to clients saying, you know, thank you for selecting me. Here is the buyer advisory link. Please save this. This is something you will use in the future, and it's updated several times a year. So please save the link and go back and use this resource. It's a great resource. All right, inspection period notice. So on the non-member, it says prior to the expiration, right? Isn't that funny? Prior to the expiration of the inspection period, prior to the same exact words. Sometimes they tried to flip them. It's very cute because you can see the same words, but they're slightly moved around. Buyer to deliver to seller a single signed notice of any items buyer objects to with an election to cancel or provide seller the opportunity. Is the BINSR required in the AAR contract? No, it's available. It's available, but it's not required, right? So you absolutely can use it. We had an agent whose seller or whose buyer, I don't want to use this. I'm not interested in using that. Well, the reality was he didn't want to follow the timelines, which are very clearly delineated, right? The timelines are in the BINSR or in the contract? In the contract, right? So I had to explain to him they're actually in the contract. You don't have to use the buyer inspection notice. Does not change that the buyer has how many days? Buyer disapproves. He has that time period. And then the notice has to be given. Where is this? Oops. Oh, they can cancel. Notice fails. Just no, this is not the timeline yet. Okay. So, or they can provide seller the opportunity, which then gives the seller how many days? 5 days to respond, right? So let's see what seller shall respond in writing within 5 days after delivery if there's some objection. So seller's failure to respond to buyer within the specified time shall be deemed seller's refusal to correct or address the items object. So very, very similar.
They don't need any form though, like they just email you or what?
No, I believe they do have a form. I'm not pulling their forms, but this is just the timelines. But yes, I do believe they have forms. I wasn't breaking down their separate.
Yeah, just
There.
curious if it's read that way, you know? That
Yeah.
little tiny-
Yeah, exactly. So this says if seller agrees in writing to correct them, then seller shall correct them. And then the repairs have to be done 3 days or blank days prior to close of escrow, right? So the other thing says if seller agrees to correct, same exact thing, right? Workmanlike manner, right? Deliver paid receipts showing the corrections. How many of you get your sellers to give you the receipts? What happens if the seller repairs it? What receipts need to be provided? None? Really? It says receipts. If they go to Home Depot and buy things, those are receipts. They paid for something. Yeah, any paid receipts. People think that that's only contractors, but it's not. If they go buy electrical outlets, they should have a receipt of those electrical outlets, right? So you see that it is a new electrical outlet. Now, if they had a stash of electrical outlets and they use those, there are no receipts. I get that. But if they actually went and bought stuff, those should be available. All right. So if seller's unwilling or unable to correct or address, then the buyer may cancel this contract within how many days? 5 days. So somebody tell me the timeline of the inspection period with the responses. 10, we'll use the standard, right? 10 days. Buyer has to respond. Of course, that's adjustable, right? What's the next one? Seller has how many days? 5 days. And how many does buyer have? 5 days. How many of you wanted to say 3 there?
Oh, because
So many people see that upper one, those upper 2 that say the buyer's 3 days or blank days prior to close of escrow. That is not the timeline. That is the repair and receipts deadline prior to close of escrow. So it's 10, 5, and 5. If you're working with an investor, I highly recommend that you change that last date that buyer only has 1 day to respond. Because what they love to do is say, we're going to close this deal in 10 days. We're going to do a 7-day inspection period. Isn't that awesome? And you're like, yeah, awesome. You get to day 7 and what do? They send you a BINSR with a bunch of crap on it. Guess what? Even if you respond in 1 day, how many days do they have left to respond? 5. you're now to day 12 and your seller's trying to figure out, are we closing or are we not closing? And it's so convenient because those buyers always disappear when you're blowing up their phone and they just don't answer. Right? Because they know exactly what they've done and you totally missed it. Do you guys understand what I'm talking about? You know the investors I'm talking about that want to offer you a sweet deal, get this under contract? 10-day close, no big deal, 7-day inspection period. Counter that. Counter that so they can't draw you out. Does that make sense? Everybody online get that? So same here.
Got it.
Unwilling. Yep.
Got it.
Got it. All right. Awesome. Thank you. Okay. Verbal discussions. How many people understand this? Verbal discussions do not extend these time periods. Only written agreements signed by both parties. And look, whoops, there should have been another one. Oh, well, yes. Failure to give notice. Hold on. There should be another one that says, there should be another one on theirs. I do believe they had, okay, I've moved on, but I do believe they had the same thing. There are no verbal discussions that can change that timeline. I'm going to go back real quickly to the Binzer because people seem to not to understand some of this. So what happens if the seller sends over their response, says they're going to do 5 items, and 2 days later they call you, you represent the seller and say, you know what, I want to change that. Can the seller change that after they've delivered it? Wow, this room should be so certain on that. What's the answer? No. It's and so here's the thing. The buyer has the initial inspection period. It's the buyer's time. If the buyer sends in the Binzer on day 7, what happens to that time? It stops. And now it moves over to the seller. The buyer cannot make any changes because they've given up their time. Their time is done. The seller has those 5 days. And as soon as the seller responds, clock has now shifted. It is now the buyer's time. That's why I've had people say, well, can I do a counter? Can I do an addendum? Your time is over. You can't do any of that. It's done, right? Does that make sense? Okay. So let's look at, you can ask, and I'm going to say no. Now, can you guys mutually agree to do an addendum? Sure. But it's not a part of that time, right? That time is over. That doesn't mean you can't work with the other party and say, hey, can we come to an agreement? We'd like to offer your client another $3,000 instead of fixing this. Will you accept? Sure. Okay. But you can't take back what you've given or can't uncancel what you've canceled, right? You've canceled, write a new offer. That makes sense? Okay, home warranty. So very similar, both contracts have the opportunity for home warranty. They've kind of condensed theirs. So it's 3 lines instead of whatever that is, 7 lines. So, but it is their buyers, who's issuing it, what to be paid. They got rid of what it includes. How many of you wrote TBD? Like, who knew what you were going to add? Like, you knew the price, but did you really add salt system or salt cells or, you know, whatever? Did you really add that? So they just got rid of that. So it makes sense. They needed to lose a few lines. Trust me, there are 500 and some on lines. So, okay, walkthroughs. Reasonable access to do walkthroughs. Responsibility regarding inspections, they have to make the property available, right? They're both kind of covering that. Walkthroughs, inspections, reasonable access to conduct walkthroughs. So they have some additional language here. These 2 paragraphs, a lot more language there than up above. You can see the 235 to 245 is the non-ML or non-member version of the contract. So little more lengthy there in those sections, and it continues on the next page, right? So talking about what could have been reasonable if they did a walk. So if you don't do a walkthrough, you know, basically if it could have been seen and you didn't see it because you didn't choose to do a walkthrough. By the way, Who should be doing your buyer walkthroughs? Real question.
Fire.
And if not the buyer's designated person, who should not be doing the buyer walkthrough? Realtors, real estate agents, please do not do walkthroughs. I learned this very early in my career. I did it for my minister who was traveling here, brand new minister to the area, did the walkthrough in May, arrived in mid-June. Everything was working fine. I swear on my walkthrough. Guess what was not working when he arrived? The air conditioning. Talk about egg on my face. No, we had a home warranty, but still, I mean, just awful feeling, like really, right? So that's the reason, right? Who else was verifying with me that that air conditioning was working? On the walkthrough.
Brings back a good point because you can.
You
hire
can,
the inspector to come back.
yep, inspector can come out and make sure that the property, yeah, you could do that. Yep, go ahead.
Actually, I have now, in last few sales, I suggested my client buyer even to pay that extra 120, 150 to pay for a walk to the inspection.
There you go.
Help them.
So they're saying that they advise their buyer to have the inspector come back and do the walkthrough. The only thing you do have to be careful of is make sure they are aware of what was agreed to and not other things that were previously noted, because the buyer may not have asked for those to be repaired. So you need to make sure that the inspector knows the things that you're looking for that should have been repaired. And then if something else that's new that was not there, obviously you do want to know about that. But all right, so let's keep going because we got a lot left to do. IRS and FIRPTA reporting. This is Foreign Investment and Real Property Tax Act. Interesting. I'm not quite sure why this does not say the IRS on it. It just says FIRPTA, which is fine, but FIRPTA is notification to the IRS, is it not? My title person's nodding her head. Yes. So I'm not quite sure why the other version doesn't actually say the IRS, but it does say FIRPTA on there. Okay. So again, it's kind of odd because FIRPTA involves the IRS. All right. Let's see if I can get another poll working. We're going to flip this, but let me get to my polls here. Come on, folks online. Oops. Uh-oh. Let me close that one and go back up for a new. Where'd my poll go? Wait. This should be number. There we go. One more. Okay. It is weird that it made me do it a different way. Ha! Hold on, folks online. Gonna figure out how to get you off of that one and do that one. There we go. All right, folks online, can you see that one? Yeah. Okay, so
Yes.
question one.
Yeah, you did pull one, not pull five. 6 now.
Oh, hang on a second. Let me end that poll and go back. I want to launch 5. All right, let's try this one. Poll 5. True or false? On the AAR purchase contract, the buyer must provide a copy of the appraisal to the seller if they cancel based on the appraisal contingency. Number 2, true or false? On the AAR vacant land purchase contract, the default due diligence period is 30 days. And number 3, true or false? The AAR purchase contract requires the seller to provide a clue report to the buyer. Did I say that backwards? The seller to provide the clue report to the buyer. Okay. Required. We'll let people online have another minute. Everybody's ready to answer now. They're going. We got this. By the way, folks here, we do have lunch. I brought in some lunch, so when we're done, you've got some food here if you'd like to have something. Folks online, next time come in. Okay, let's go ahead and get to these. So true or false? On the AAR purchase contract, the buyer must provide a copy of the appraisal to the seller if they cancel based on the appraisal contingency. Look, it's split online, and the answer is here false. In the AAR contract, it actually does not say, but if you have not figured out, a lot of these questions have to do with what the non-member contract has slightly modified from the AAR contract. In this contract, it does say that you must provide a copy of the appraisal should it not appraise, okay? Question 2, true or false? On the AAR vacant land purchase contract, the default due diligence period is 30 days. That's funny because she says true on here, but it is 20. Oh, you know what? AAR is 30. This contract has it as 20. So I know, that's why. So yes, it is actually true. It is 30 days on our vacant land contract of the AAR contract. Okay, and then number 3, Melissa was very quick to catch on this. The AAR purchase contract requires the seller to provide a clue report to the buyer, true or false? The answer is false. What does the AAR purchase contract require the seller to provide? A insurance claims history. Does everybody know what clue actually stands for?
Oh, yeah.
I did it last time, maybe someone else.
What does it stand for? Exchange. Comprehensive loss underwriting exchange. It is actually a true company, and it's a report that is delivered. Actually, it's LexisNexis, I believe, that actually produces the report. Probably costs between $75 and $100 to pull today. So if for some reason you are given this contract and you are a seller, I do actually recommend that unless you want to pay that $75 or $100, that you counter it and say you're going to provide a claims history. What else does the AAR contract give the seller the option to if they are not able to obtain a claims history? Does anybody know? A written statement by the seller on whether or not there were any claims. So again, countering that might be something you want to look at. How are we doing on time here? Oh, good. All right. Oh, I gotta press the screen. Remedies. So again, it's got a number, which means it's from the AAR contract. So 7 remedies. This is the cure period. This is about the potential breach of contract, right? And the opportunity to fix it. Prior to any claim for default, both buyer and seller have an opportunity to cure any alleged default, right? So they have 3 days after delivery of such notice. Very similar language. They just, massage the words just a little bit so you know what's there. Now, breach. So 7B is breach, and look at this, breach of contract, right? In the event of breach, non-breaching party may cancel, subject to dispute resolutions, all sorts of other things in here. I'm not going to go into detail on this, but you do have 2 very similar sections. Oops, I've got ADR down on the bottom there. ADR dispute resolution, that is what is in the AAR contract, is the alternative dispute resolution. I'm sorry. And look, ADR and mediation, right? So both of them are on there, but I don't believe theirs specifies that they're submitted to the American Arbitration Association. I believe that it is not. It says in accordance with the Arizona Revised Uniform Arbitration Act, but not a specific association. So you're a little more restricted on the AAR contract with how you proceed. And that's because AAR has mediation systems in place that you can contact. This is outside of that, so you would have to go seek mediation and ADR support there. Following matters are excluded when it goes to small claims court, et cetera. And when it gets out of that, there's all sorts of things here. Exclusions to ADR, very, very similar, right? Some of the same numbers, small claims. Seller acknowledges, seller accepts buyer's earnest money. So this is different. I threw this in here just so you guys are aware of this. This is interesting. They have a different notice here. They have several categories in the non-member that say notice. This is one of them. It says seller acknowledges that if seller accepts the buyer's earnest money as non-refundable prior to close of escrow, seller may have waived further right to damages. So any of you negotiating for earnest money to be non-refundable need to have a conversation with your seller, because if the deal falls apart, they may not be able to go after that buyer for any damages, and they may not realize that they are giving up that right. Right? This is clearly spelling it out, but that is also under the AAR contract in terms of when it's not, when you've accepted the earnest money, you're accepting the earnest money and you're done, right? If a client wants to sue for additional damages, they don't accept the earnest money, because when you accept it, it says this is all you're collecting and that's, you're moving on. So please think about that anytime you're writing that non-refundable language. Oh, I don't know what happened here.
I have a question.
Yep.
You wanna, negotiate some, like the buyer wants something and your seller, like I represent the seller. Sometimes you try to be, creative like that, like, okay, well, if they want that, like, let's make the earnest money non-refundable and immediately release to the seller. Can you, not make it non-refundable and just say the earnest money currently being held to be released to the seller immediately? And if, so they still have the opportunity if something else goes?
How are you getting it back?
Well, I mean, that would be more difficult to get it back, but I'm just wondering if that's a possibility. Would title ever release it unless it was non-refundable?
We're gonna put non-refundable.
Okay.
And here's the thing, once it's released, good luck,
Well, right, yes.
right?
but-
And I honestly, when people come to me with that, I'm like, what happens if the seller cancels?
Yeah, if the seller doesn't, they're going to your money, yeah.
What happens if it's non-refundable? Doesn't say without seller default. Thank you, got my money, see ya. You do understand we have an additional clause addendum that has a very specific paragraph that says, except for no, it's not that, the condition of the property, in case there's a fire or flood or something like that, or seller default. So please, if you're getting into that non-refundable, please go look at the additional clause addendum. If you're a realtor, go look at that AAR document, because it really does make a difference, okay? I am not sure what's happening on my formatting here. There should be another notice that should have come through here, but we'll see if it pops in here. But the attorney fees, obviously prevailing party gets thing, but actually what I was highlighting here is, it's interesting is they say arising out of or relating to. So the other one says relating to or arising out of. So it's just like kids trying not to, be plagiarize. They just found ways to, move things. Let's see if the other thing of notice. I don't know what happened to the other notice. Okay, we have one last poll before we complete this. Let's see if I can get the last. Oh, actually, I don't have this on for you guys, so you can just play along. True or false? And I don't even think I did those. So on the AAR purchase contract, a buyer may assign the contract or interest without written approval from the seller. And then number two, true or false on the AAR purchase contract, a seller must wait until the day after scheduled close of escrow to cure a buyer for failure to close escrow on time. Okay, so number one, and online, if you guys want to open your mics and share, you're welcome to do that. Otherwise, you can send stuff in the chat and Kevin will tell me what you said. I do not have this poll set up. So A buyer may assign the contractor interest without written approval from the seller.
The lender will need to have
The buyer?
the lender.
We're not talking about lenders. We're talking about buyers. May a buyer assign the contract without written approval from the seller? It is true, in the current contract, there is nothing to prohibit, even if it does not say assignee, from me transferring it to you, you can buy the property now. The seller has no right to say, no, you can't transfer it.
It's still assignable,
Yeah.
but what you're thinking of is how you do have to disclose if you're a wholesaler or those type of things.
I just remember when I first started, you know,
Mhm.
so many years ago, it said and or assignee. So then when they took that out, I thought that you couldn't do that anymore. So, yeah.
Nope, it's still assignable. What are we seeing with all these wholesalers? Yes, they have to disclose that, but they have to disclose it if they're not going to move forward. They often, if they're moving forward, they don't even care
So
because,
like buyer put it into a trust without like the
Yep.
seller agreeing. kind of thing?
correct. Yep, happens all the time. So on the AAR purchase contract, the seller must wait until the day after scheduled close of escrow to cure a buyer for failure to close escrow on time.
This, yeah, you do have to wait, even though you should do it at 5:01 PM. You do have to wait.
You 11:59.
So it's true, you have to wait till midnight to issue the cure notice. You have to wait till the next day to issue that cure notice on the AAR contract. So we'll get to that here in just a second. Oh, risk of loss. That was the section I was referring to. If you're doing the non-refundable, please put the exclusion that except for risk of loss or seller default, right? And don't give the money up front. Say it's non-refundable, but it stays at title except for these two sections. So both contracts have something regarding risk of loss. That's not unusual. Permission, buyer and seller grant permission to advise the public. Arizona law covers this. This says, this actually doesn't say it can be advised to the public. I could not find that. I need to read further. But this bottom one does say the contract's governed by Arizona law. It also says that it must be, changes must be in writing signed by each party. So, that's there. Let's see. Time is of the essence, and both contracts do have that. Let's see, this says, and then this is talking about term days shall mean calendar days, right? And counted beginning on the day following the event that triggers the timing requirement. I actually like that being defined because often in the AAR contract, people don't understand you go under contract today, which means day one is the next day, right? And they're like, well, but we went under contract, that's day one. No, that's the day that's triggering everything. The next day is day one. Because you could go under contract at 11:58 p.m. You're not losing that day. You start counting, you get a full day. Right. Okay, so compensation, both contracts do have sections that talk about compensation. And both of them have either in bold or in big block text that broker compensation is not set by law, board, blah, 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 right? Okay, blah, 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 right, is right. Copies and counterparts, it's been put everywhere, so I don't need to read that. So both of them have copies and counterparts. You can certainly do, here, we'll throw this over here, see if that works. You can have your client sign one, the other party can sign another one, except for the lead-based paint disclosure, because that has to be signed as one instrument. And we talked about that yesterday. So we go back to the days. This was referencing days in the contract construed as calendar days. And then calculating time periods. Then we're going to have, go back over here, calculating time periods. So both of them is talking the same thing. midnight to 11:59 PM, and how you count the days as things go. However, there's a key difference. Here you go, Melissa. If a party fails to
Yes.
close escrow on the closing date by 5 PM, the non-breaching party may issue a cure notice after 5 PM. So at 5:01, you can issue the cure notice on the same day of close of escrow, because it,
Why that wasn't anticipated breach anyway.
so, but, so that does change in the other one. Please know on the AAR contract, that is not the way it's written. So,
That's a quick question.
yep,
A,
uh-huh,
so have to wait till midnight.
yep,
So we have 3 full days after that.
correct,
Almost 4 full days.
correct. Yep. You have 4, what he's saying
The
is,
other one's better because 501, day 0 is halfway done, so. the first
Correct.
day-
so what happens is, because you can't do it until after the day after close of escrow, you're technically losing an entire extra day. Now, however, I've often seen agents play with that day and work to try to see if they could get it addressed and then issue it later in the day, hoping that they could get it resolved. So yes, you could issue at 12:01, but you might also be issuing it at 4 o'clock that afternoon when you realize they haven't been able to get it done, right? How many times has your lender said, it'll be done tomorrow, it'll be done tomorrow, right? And you're trying to get the deal to close. So, but issuing a cure notice does not create the breach. Hopefully everybody understands that, right? Creating a cure notice just states that there's a time clock on things and gives your buyer the right to act at the end of that time period if they choose to. It does not obligate them to do anything. Please use the cure notice. It turns on a time clock, right? Because if you don't issue the cure notice, in this case, as the seller, if you don't issue a cure notice and the buyer is dragging this on and dragging this on and dragging this on, the seller can't do anything until after those 3 days. There's no way to say they're in breach until the seller issues that cure notice, right? Does that make sense? Okay. So this is the entire contract with addenda, entire agreement. Subsequent offers in the AAR contract, subsequent offers in the non-member contract, accepted as a backup contingent upon cancellation of this contract. Cancellation, party who wishes to exercise. Cancellation, party who wishes to exercise. So a lot of very similar language. What we will get into in the next half hour, because this will take just another half hour, is all of these paragraphs that were not in the AAR contract. So here's one of those other sections. This is one notice that we have. Here's a notice. And they have a lot of sections that are called notice in their contract, which is a little confusing, but hand delivery. What is not included in notice? What is not an acceptable method of delivery? No, hand delivery is there. It's number 1. Text. Text message. Text message is not a method of delivery. If you are texting over your purchase contract, it is not delivered, folks. Seriously, it's not. Please do not use text messages as a method of delivery. If you are sending over a cancellation notice, it's not delivery. I know we use text a ton, but why is it not used? I'm almost positive this is the reason. Why is text not used as a method of delivery?
It's not as well.
It's not as reliable. They could say they never received it. Maybe they didn't receive it, right? Not reliable. If somebody's on a plane, do you get all those messages? Maybe, but maybe not. Have you ever had somebody say, did you get my message? And you're like, no, what? So if you're driving and your cell phone coverage drops, does that message necessarily come through? So my guess is that is the reason. And there's no way, I guess you could send it to yourself. I know you can't, because there's no way to copy yourself unless you had another phone number. I guess you could put your email and attach your email to it so it goes to your email. But if you're CCing somebody, if you're if you're emailing somebody and you're blind copying yourself, you get receipt of that. You know that they got it because it went out and you got it. But actually with the email, when you send it, it's considered delivered. Okay. Text message, not delivered. Please, please be aware of that. Okay. Release of broker, we've got one, they've got one, almost exactly word for word actually on this one. So not surprising. Broker indemnity, they have another one. This kind of refers to earlier that the buyer is to advise with qualified professionals and that brokers are not qualified to do those due diligence things. I think we had a slightly different version. Okay, terms of acceptance, right? Offer will become binding when acceptance is signed by seller. This is on the AAR one. We put the close of escrow date. Does anybody remember from last week? Close of escrow on theirs is on page 1, right up front. This one is all the way back on line 437, right? Then it says the underside agrees, right? And a copy has been given to them, including the buyer attachment, by the way. So signature page, right? So there says terms of acceptance, right? This offer shall expire unless acceptance is delivered at a certain time, right? And if the seller, until the seller accepts the offer and delivers fully executed agreement, buyer may withdraw this offer at any time. I don't believe that is up above. That is very interesting. I like that it's very clearly detailed that you can withdraw the offer. This is the AAR saying how many pages. This is the non-member. There are 12 pages exclusive of the addenda. Confirm you've received and read all 12 pages. Then it goes on to say if no signed acceptance is received by the above date and time, this shall be deemed withdrawn and buyer's earnest money returned. Not quite sure why the buyer's earnest money is being returned because I don't know that it's gone anywhere. So that to me is a little puzzling, but yeah, I guess. Please don't take checks from your buyers in advance. Just. But yes, you're right. We used to take the check from our clients. And now how many of our clients even have checkbooks? So it doesn't matter. So lots of other ways that money gets delivered. Okay. Undersigned agrees to sell the premises on the terms and conditions herein stated, acknowledge receipt of copy hereof and grant permission to broker named in section 9A to deliver a copy to buyer, right? And then there's a box for counteroffer. This is the AAR one. So by the way, if you ever have somebody deliver this to you and there is no name in either 8 or 9A for brokers, because somebody scammed the contract doesn't really work because it hasn't been delivered to those parties. Really quite right. If you notice how many things reference back to the brokers, can't really do the contract without any brokers. Now you can have an unrepresented, I get that. But somebody stealing the AAR contract, it doesn't really work if you read through the language of the contract. It's always referring back to the brokers. So in the AAR contract, there is a spot that says offer rejected. Sometimes people do want to see that. Have your sellers check the box and initial that. On the non-member version, it has everything all consolidated. Check 1, they're accepting the offer, they're countering it, or they're rejecting it, right? Check, check, check. What happens if your lovely DocuSign program is having that little checkbox moving around? Right? Have anybody ever seen that where you put it on there and then you look back and it's like moved over, kind of like the squigglies on my screen today. I don't know if people can see those online, hopefully not. Yes. Okay, so I have finished all of the AAR contract. There is other paragraphs in the non-member purchase contract. So just to give you that opportunity, I've got 25 minutes if you want to see these. If you need to leave, you can leave, but I just thought I'd share them with you. They have specifically that the seller shall convey title through a warranty deed unless otherwise agreed, unless agreed to otherwise, right? I'm putting all this together here because it's seller concessions, seller compensation, and consent. So they've combined all of these. I talked about it before. In the AAR version, we have the seller compensation agreement, or excuse me, seller compensation addendum. They have it all contained on here. Please, if you do receive one of these as the listing agent, right? Do not ask for a seller compensation addendum. It is in the contract, right? We don't need another document. It is detailed here. There is no other document because they do not have another document. Okay, no other additional addendum. Okay. In the event of breach, I talked about this earlier, escrow company is not releasing it. If you are under contract with one of these scenarios, your clients need to be given attorney names because they are heading to litigation. One way or another, they can do maybe alternative dispute, but they're not getting title to address that unless both parties agree to something. So before you pony up with the attorneys, talk to the other agent. Is there some way you can resolve this, right? Because otherwise that earnest money is not going anywhere. Okay. Whoop. All right. Homeowners Association. So I think this is one that is going to confuse people the most. If you are the listing agent and you have done the HOA addendum like a good listing agent and you get this offer in, there is no HOA addendum. This is the HOA information, right? They're going to put this together. They will not use that HOA addendum. So they're going to hopefully put on there the information that is correct and communicate that via the offer. Here is their HOA information that is normally on the AAR addendum, right? They give that disclosure of what needs to happen. If there's written notice of upcoming assessments during escrow, which is not due prior to close, seller's not obligated, buyer has 5 days to say, I'm out of here, right? So almost everything still has that 5 days type thing, except for the homeowners, the 10 days for the HOA to provide materials, right? So HOA contingency, buyer shall have 5 days after receipt of the information from the seller or homeowners association to provide notice of any disapproved items and cancel under the termination terms herein. Buyer is advised to contact the association for verification of this information. So again, if you're the listing agent, your HOA addendum is not going to be used. If you want to put something in there, now this is coming back from you as the seller. If you want to put in there that if these numbers don't match up, buyer gets to pay any differences because the buyer is the one that filled this out. They're the ones that, according to this, are responsible. You could do that. It's up to you how you want to counter that, but it's an option. But there is no HOA addendum, okay? Let's see, seller financing in the non-member MLS access. So they actually have a full seller financing section that basically says buyer and seller agree to negotiate this. And then it basically should say that they need to go get an attorney, I believe, to parties are advised to immediately consult independent legal counsel. How many of you have used this seller financing addendum? Nobody in this room. So I don't know if anybody online has, but we do have seller financing addendums. There are a couple of different ones in the AAR contract for a seller that is just doing a one-off and they're going to finance one property. That's fine. But if you're doing multiple ones, and I'm not even going to give you a number, but there are a couple, if you do a couple, I think it's fine. But then there's one that if you've done multiple ones, then you have to comply with all sorts of other regulations and stuff as a regular lender. So this is basically saying you guys can do this, get somebody to write that up. We're not writing it up. There's no template. They need to go get that written, okay? Let's see, oops, find that. So here's more to the seller financing contingency. Let me go back, sorry, right to cancel. This was something just totally different thrown in there. I had a space, so I was adding that in. Right to cancel, this says all personal property not included in the sale and debris, right, will be removed from the property, right, by close of escrow. Leased items do not convey, but they also have something in here that says seller shall disclose all leased items within 3 days of contract acceptance, and then buyer has 5 days or their inspection period to disapprove of leased items that do not convey. Water softener, obviously the solar, but usually things like water softener, RO systems, alarm systems, those could be leased items, and the buyer may go, hold on a minute, I don't want somebody to come and rip out all of the alarm system, right? So that if they thought that was conveying and it doesn't. So kind of interesting little thing. Buyer is advised to review the buyer advisory to assist in the due diligence. This came up earlier, I did mention it. Now, we do have that, and what's interesting is a couple of these notices that are in the non-member contract are actually the same place or similar to the things that are on this page that says you can obtain information through the buyer advisory at AARonline, ... Where is that located on the purchase contract? Does anybody know? Page 1. I didn't even bring up page 1, right? But page 1 has a lot of these little things that say, hey, go get the buyer advisory, right? This is another section that talks about something different in the non-member contract survey. Because this is covering vacant land, they had to add in the potential for a survey. Because typically with vacant land, you are required or you do want to get a survey, right? Whether it's a certified survey, boundary survey, what type of survey it is, what is detailed. So that's already built in, okay? Seller right to request for any cancellation based upon the appraisal contingency. This is saying buyer shall deliver a copy of the written appraisal to the seller upon request by seller. Seller has to ask for it, right? On this version. Remember my question on the poll, AAR purchase contract, you don't have to deliver it. Now, that doesn't mean you can't. Anytime I've dealt with one that hasn't appraised, both parties have agreed and provided that to the seller. Right now, obviously, maybe somebody is lying. I don't know. You have to take it upon their word. There's nothing you can do about it, though, in the AAR contract. So if you're concerned about the appraisal and using an AAR contract, maybe you write in there for any cancellation based on the appraisal contingency, buyer shall deliver a copy of the written appraisal to seller, period. Add it in your counteroffer, right? Not a bad thing to add in there. Covers your buyer. So buyer contingency, this is their buyer contingency agreement for the buyer's ability to obtain financing is contingent upon the sale of a property owned by buyer before
So in a
blank.
lot of ways, this is better because we have a different.
Oh, somebody was having a conversation. All right. So, subject to, there is a buyer's contingency addendum if attached, right? This is, again, these are the non-member versions. So, this is kind of tying in the FHA amendatory clause in some ways, that it's saying that there's going to be a written statement issued by Federal Housing Commissioner, right, regarding the appraisal valuation. It's kind of warning people that there is something like that. This is contingent on a loan, right? There's just extra language. I had already pulled the loan contingency, so these are more paragraphs. Marketable title contingency. Now, this is fascinating, right? This contract is contingent upon seller's ability to deliver good and marketable title as evidenced by a policy of title insurance. Maybe that's under our other section on title insurance, but it's kind of nice to have it just clearly stated that you have to be able to convey title, right? It doesn't say it? Okay, all right. Just not highlighted out. I missed the paragraph there. It's buried in there. So advertisement notice to buyer and seller. So this is fascinating. How many times has somebody said, but you said in the MLS, it was conveying with whatever, the refrigerator, washer, dryer, the car, I don't care, right? This clearly says items listed as included or excluded in the multiple listing service, marketing materials or disclosures are not included in the purchase price or excluded from the sale unless specified in the contract. All items are transferred without value and without seller warranty unless otherwise agreed to in writing. So just a reminder, make sure that you're detailing those if you're wanting them to convey and that they are at no value or seller warranty. So kind of nice to have them there. There's some good things here. Failure to pay, buyer acknowledges failure to pay, closing funds by close of escrow if not cured, shall be deemed a material breach. Pre and post possession, broker is required by law to advise parties to seek independent counsel from insurance, legal, tax, and accounting professionals regarding pre and post possession of the property. Verification, if a cash transaction, buyer shall attach readily available funds to close escrow. That is really great to have, that they have those funds ready to close, right? Pre and post possession, please, folks, while Realty One Group does not really like pre and post possessions, you do actually have access to a basic pre and post possession document. Please make sure you've advised clearly to your clients, preferably in an email saying, we advise you to seek legal counsel and get insurance for that time period. Whose insurance is in place on close of escrow, on the day of close of escrow? Whose insurance?
Sellers.
Whose date belongs to close of escrow? Who owns the close of escrow date? No matter when it closes,
Seller.
the
Oh.
buyer. Everything begins on close of escrow for the buyer, right? Everything begins on close of escrow. So the insurance belongs to the buyer, right? So if there's a post possession, whose insurance is covering the house? Seller's insurance is covering a post possession? Nope.
Right.
Buyer's insurance is covering the house because guess what happened to the seller's insurance? It's gone. They're renters. So if the seller didn't get rental insurance to cover their possessions and something happens, what insurance is covering the seller's possessions? No one's. No one's. So when we talk about advising your clients to get insurance and talk about insurance, this is why. A post-possession, the seller needs to have renter's insurance to cover their belongings. And they're like, oh, I'm covered. I've got homeowner's insurance. No, you don't. It's gone. You don't own the home anymore. Your insurance ended. And guess what? They forgot to tell their insurance company that they sold the home. They were just going to put it on their new home, and they figured if they didn't say anything, that it would continue. It doesn't. The minute the insurance company knows the home closed on March 5th, you have no insurance. There was a fire on March 7th. No insurance. So please understand the reason we tell you, please have your client talk to these people and make sure that their insurance company understands they are post-staying in that property, that they need insurance to cover their belongings for 2 days, 3 days, a month, right? Anything can happen, folks. Please understand, because the seller thought, no problem, I got that insurance coverage. No, you don't. Not at all. Right? So please watch that. It's really, really important. Okay. Wire fraud. So this is interesting, right? They put the wire fraud in a separate paragraph, but guess what? Remember I talked about that front page? AAR has wire fraud. It's just on the very front page. How many of you go over with your client that first page? I didn't include it today, and I probably should have, because I think I could have taken each of those bullet points on the front of our contract and picked up some of these other paragraphs that they have. Here's a whole section on seller warranties. If you'll notice, it says, deliver the property to buyer in a broom clean condition. Wow, that is not in the AAR contract, is it? Anybody have that conversation? The home isn't clean. I can't believe they left it this way. What is the problem with the word clean? It is totally subjective. I had a guy once call and say, yeah, everything's out of the house. And I had the buyer call, it was not my listing, it was one of my team. And a buyer called saying, yeah, there's a ton of stuff left here. And I'm like, well, what do you mean a ton of stuff? She's like a truckload. I'm like, no, you've got to be kidding me. Like, what? She was not kidding. It was a Friday at the end of the month. Myself and another agent drove over, and I had an SUV. He had a big truck. Oh, heck no. We had to go get a U-Haul, and we were pulling this crap out of the house. The home had closed. The buyer was pissed. Like, I don't know what else to do. And the seller's like, yeah, I took everything I wanted. Like, no, your stuff is supposed to be gone, right? Free of debris and personal belongings. Like, yeah, I didn't want any of that. Are you kidding me? So, but I do love the broom clean. I think that that's a better way to say it, because then you kind of know that it's not clean. It's just swept out. And your buyer just needs to know, if you want it, you're clean, you need to hire cleaners to clean it to your level of clean. Because I say most of the time, it's not to a buyer's level of clean. So, and interesting, it says the provisions of this section shall survive closing. That means they could pursue if that stuff isn't removed, right? So just different things. Again, I highlighted this. If seller acknowledges, seller accepts buyer earnest money is non-refundable prior to close, seller may have waived further rights to damages. Agents are not qualified to provide any opinion on whether either party has acted in good faith or which party is entitled to the deposited funds. What a statement, right? Agents, get out of the way. You can't comment on this. I actually like saying that, right? Buyer and seller advised to seek the advice of qualified real estate attorney regarding the matter, right? So whether somebody's acted in good faith or not, please, I mean, that's not in the AAR, I don't think, but that is a very good statement. Please do not provide your opinions on those things. Assignment. So this is different. Buyer may not sell, assign, or transfer buyer's rights or obligations under this contract or any interest herein unless otherwise negotiated. I believe actually they have that it has to be in writing, but 1031, they've got a paragraph on the 1031 exchange. So if you've never done a 1031, you do have to have that language in there, because both parties have to agree that they're going to sign the 1031 paperwork. Because if you don't understand, a property being sold as a part of a 1031 exchange, it actually sells to the 1031 first, and then the 1031 sells it to the buyer. And there's a whole lot of paperwork that makes that happen, because the money has to go to the 1031 exchange house and not to the seller directly. They cannot receive any money directly. Does that make sense? So pretty cool that that paragraph is in there. No changes unless in writing. What I thought interesting here is this contract is binding upon the heirs, beneficiary, and devisees of the parties here too. Then licensee disclosure, here's an interesting one. Licensee makes the following disclosure if marked. Licensee is a principal or licensee has the following interest, direct or indirect in this transaction. The other box is family or firm relationship with licensee or ownership interest in buyer or seller, and then specify the relationship, right? Is it your spouse? Is it a cousin? Usually it's just to immediate family, right? Is it parents, siblings, children, right? So we're getting a lot of LLCs that are owning property and agents think they don't have to claim that they're a part of that LLC. Of course you do. You have to say that you're a licensee, you're related to, or you're going to have an interest in the thing. Look at that. That's all, folks. All right. Anybody online have any questions before I shut this down? You're gonna have to unmute yourself. You can go ahead and unmute if you have some questions. Any out there from people online?
Thank you, Melissa. Have a great day.
You're welcome. Thank you, guys. Okay, I'm going to stop recording. Okay, any other questions here?